Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Cafe Khaleej. And my coffee companion today is Dr. Gertjan Hoetjes, who is a lecturer in Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Groningen in Netherlands. Dr. Hoetjes acquired his PhD degree just this year in March during the most exceptional of circumstances from University of Exeter, my alma mater. And his research focused on the impact of internet technology on the Gulf monarchies, and his focus was mainly Kuwait and Oman. Wow. Welcome, Dr. Hoetjes. Welcome to Cafe Khaleej. Good to have you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sana.
I mean,
Great
so
being here.
thank you. So where did this fascination actually begin with GCC, with the Khaleej? How did it all begin?
Yeah, good question. It actually started very early. It was during the first Gulf War in
Mhm.
1991. The military operation of a coalition of countries on the UN flag, but led by the UN against Iraq. And I was at that time I was 6 years old.
Mhm.
And yeah, my sister was carrying me for Saddam Hussein and his Scud rockets, and I was like really interested in what was happening in Kuwait, what was going on over there, and also like the consequences for the Netherlands at that time. So yeah, that brought me a fascination, first of all, for foreign policy, but also of the Middle East. And since then, I always had like a kind of a soft spot for the Middle East, but I also had some interest in China actually. And then actually in the third year of my studies, political science at the University of Amsterdam, I wrote with two other students a bachelor dissertation on the response of the European Union to the Lebanon crisis, and then actually I became more and more knowledgeable of the Middle East, and also yeah, for it was a really fascinating region, especially because it could be to a large extent be seen as a black box because there's so many different influences, economic, religious, cultural influences that impact upon developments in the region. And then, yeah, in my master year at the University of Amsterdam, I decided to follow as much courses on the Middle East as possible. And then I had the chance to visit Iran, and it was back in 2008. That was led by Paul Aerts. Maybe you are familiar with his name. And yeah, that trip to Iran was really like fascinating for me. It opened up a whole new world, and then I thought like, okay, I really want to make my work of this. So I decided to write my master's dissertation. My first plan was to write it on Iran, but actually I changed subject, and then I decided to work on the GCC and the European Union as my main subject. And then I contacted all the embassy of the Netherlands in the Middle East in order to ask them if I could be stationed at one of the embassies in order to yeah, help also writing my master's dissertation and do some interviews on the ground. And then actually I had a positive response from the embassy of Kuwait, the Dutch embassy in Kuwait. So then I had the chance to go to Kuwait at the beginning of 2009, and since then, yeah, my focus on on the Gulf region and particularly the GCC states really started.
All right. So, um, your second degree was, I mean, your PhD was, I believe, 5 years long. And
Yeah, 4.5 years.
yeah, I mean, almost all fields currently now seem to be, raging with the debate of, decolonization. But as a Western scholar, I mean, how did you encounter any kind of hostility during your 5 years long research? I mean, your association with GCC studies have been longer than that, I'm sure. But then, what exactly? How did you handle this, issue, and trying to sort of avoid the Western gaze as much as possible? Were there, such demands on you, or did you feel very much under that pressure?
Yeah, it's always like a very sensitive topic. I think in that regard, it has been quite beneficial that I'm not from the UK or the US, so I'm seen as less suspicious as I would be if I'm from those countries. Also, given um, previous actions of the US and the UK, and the Netherlands is a little bit more unknown for people. So when you introduce yourself as a Dutch scholar, that has a kind of benefit, I think. But also like in regards to how to approach my research. That has been the main thing I've tried to do is to base my findings as much as possible on research, and really try to involve the people I've been speaking to in Oman and in Kuwait as much as possible in my research, and use their insight in order to write my PhD. And I hope I managed to do that. And also, I mean, one of the main important elements of that was to avoid Orientalism, and to really, not make it a collaborative project. Which and I think one of the pitfalls with Western academia is that people just go for a couple of days to a country, just speak mostly only to high officials of the government, and then return back. And what I try to do is to stay as much as possible in both countries, to speak as much as possible to different segments of the population, and try also to use their insights in order to produce the dissertation. And yeah, that's the way I try to work around it. And yeah, it's up to the judgment of my of my PhD thesis to what extent I managed to do that. I mean, one of the main critics that could be issued against my PhD, first of all, I used a Western concept called contentious politics. So still, like, my theoretical framework has been grounded in Western academic literature, but the reason I took contentious politics was that it was much more easier to adapt it to authoritarian context, which I think is really important when you're studying Kuwait and Oman. And yeah, the other thing is, I mean, especially talking to Islamists, it has been more difficult for me. So I think that aspect in regards to my PhD, I tried to cover that
Why was it
aspect.
difficult,
And
in the sense, I mean, were they inaccessible, or they were really skeptical speaking to you? What exactly was the...
I mean, they were more difficult to access.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And that's also like the method I using, like the snowball method. So, but I try to cover as much as possible that perspective as well, because I think it's really important in regards to both countries.
So how did the decision for your research topic came about? I mean, considering that it is quite, dealing with a very contemporary issue in a sense, do you only tackle the impact it has had on the ruling structure, or you also talk about, the whole, the idea that was what social media in general has played, uh, in sort of in the success, or rather the failure, of Arab Spring and all of that. So what exactly was the main focus of your PhD thesis, if I may ask?
Yeah, yeah, the PhD thesis is actually just focused on the impact of internet technology on Kuwait and Oman, and especially the impact on contentious politics in both countries, and especially facilitating protest. So what I've done, I've been looking at both countries, and using actually all the insights that there have been on the impact of internet technology, particularly in authoritarian states, use it as a general framework in order to apply to both states, Kuwait and Oman. And I've been looking from the period from the mid 1990s onwards until now, how internet technology has been used by activists in order to make their opinion known and to distribute it among a large group, and also to coordinate protest and um, to develop narratives. And at the same time, also I've been looking at the counter reaction of the regimes in Kuwait and Oman. And through that perspective, using especially literature that has been published on the impact of internet, later also social media, on authoritarian in authoritarian regime, I've tried to analyze the impact of internet technology on both countries and provide a time frame that starts in the 1990s. So that's particularly the blogs in those countries and the forums, and what kind of impact they had, especially in challenging certain power hierarchies in both countries, and then subsequently leading on to 2011 and also the emergence of social media in both countries, and what kind of impact it had in Oman and Kuwait, and then also the period after, especially the more the repressive measures that were taken by both countries, and how both countries actually have been quite successful in stemming the use of social media, and especially social media for activism.
Why particularly Kuwait and Oman? I mean, considering your why not UAE or Qatar? I mean, considering your master's thesis was on UAE.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the reason actually I took these both countries, this is actually a question that has been asked to me many times, because I thought it was the least likely study, because both countries really differ from each other. First of all, in terms of like regime structure, in Kuwait, there always has been kind of more dynastic monarchy. If you talk about Michael Herb's work, in which the ruling family in Kuwait always has tried to have like a family consensus. Well, if you look at the regime structure in Oman, it always had been very much centered around Sultan Qaboos, and much more centralized in that aspect. On the other hand, religious structures are different in both countries. In Kuwait, it's like a 70% Sunni population, 30% Shia, while if you look at Oman, there's of course a high percentages of Ibadi, people who are part of the Ibadi sect, and also like the ruling family in Oman is from the Ibadi sect. So I thought that was an interesting aspect. And then geography, both countries like Kuwait, Oman, kind of city-state in comparison to Oman, which is much more wider in terms of geographical sense, and a much bigger country. So what kind of impact has that on the use of internet technology in both countries, and then also like differences in terms of economic um, development and GDP per capita in both countries. So therefore, I thought it would be a fascinating comparison between both.
I try to keep all these sessions as apolitical as possible, but then I can't help but asking you that, I mean, this year has been very cataclysmic for the region. I mean, in terms of not only the pandemic that is raging, but I mean, it started in January with the passing on of Sultan Qaboos, and then we had the Kuwaiti father figure. Then recently we have had the Bahraini Prime Minister. So, I mean, GCC has been anyways changed beyond a recognition for the past 3 years, especially with the frictions between, different member states. But then what do you see as the future? I mean, these were the real, the iconic, the old guard, all of these three gentlemen who passed on this year. And do you actually, feel their absence is going to be very, consequential, or they anyways, their power had sort of receded, or they were anyway any more significant for the many years. But I feel the fact that they still had very strong mediating influence. But I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult at this point already to dissect, also because we are middle in the COVID-19 pandemic, so that has also its impacts on all the countries you just mentioned.
Mhm.
So therefore it's really difficult to already like think about like what kind of impact the succession in Kuwait and Oman, Bahrain has had in that regard. But I think especially as you mentioned, the mediation role that both Sultan Qaboos played, as well as the Emir of Kuwait, the former Emir of Kuwait, Sh Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed. Yeah, I think in this regard, there will be they will be missed on the regional stage. And yeah, I think they had like a calming influence, especially with the increasing assertive policy of the UAE and Saudi Arabia within the region. And I think it will be very difficult for their successors in order to play like a similar role, especially because their successors have to gain the status as yeah, these previous rulers, um, Sultan Qaboos and Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed had within the region.
Great. So if I were to ask you, which is your personal favorite amongst all GCC countries?
Yeah, Kuwait.
Great. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
People just go gaga over Oman most of the times when it comes to
Yeah, no, no,
hospitality, the
no, but
natural beauty, but it's refreshing to
yeah,
hear
of
you
course.
say Kuwait.
Yeah, it's kind of a fascination. Actually, a friend of mine, maybe you heard her name, Anastasia Nosova. Yeah, she would probably say the same thing, and I guess it's just because we both have a lot of history over there. I was for the first time in Kuwait in 2009, so I know like the main neighborhoods of Kuwait City. I have seen like the country, yeah, also change from 2009 onwards. So I think that has been really fascinating, and also I have a lot of friends from Kuwait, so that gives like
Yeah.
a very big connection to the country. And also what I really like about Kuwait, it's the Kuwaitis are often seen as like the artists of the Gulf, and there's like a lot of creative things going on always in Kuwait. They also leading like in terms of social media, creating content of social media.
Mhm.
Also with the social media influencers of Kuwait are very well known over the Gulf. And at the same time, there are very good restaurants which are actually administered by Kuwaiti chefs, which is interesting to see. And yeah, also in terms of like the political scene, it's it's
Yeah.
very fascinating, Kuwait.
Very lively. Yes.
And then yeah. So I mean, in that regard, also like the different political spectrums. I actually didn't cover that in terms of like explaining differences between Kuwait and Oman, but especially also like the different the parliament in Kuwait, obviously, and also like the civil society in Kuwait, which is very different from yeah, the political system in Oman. So that also makes it for a very interesting country.
Okay. Lastly, I would like to ask. I mean, I still remember you told me. I mean, when the first time I contacted you with regards to this interview, I remember you telling me that there are not many with our kind of degrees around the
Yeah,
world.
definitely.
So I would like to ask you any piece of advice you would want to give to the aspiring, scholars not who are not basically from this region, but someone like yourself who is wanting to, specialize and learn more about the GCC. Any advice from your almost nearly a decade long experience of studying the Gulf?
I mean, it's interesting because there's more and more interest for the region. Also, because of like yeah, the very assertive and growing role of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates in region. Also, like the latest developments. Um, and I think so. I think it's a very good region to focus on, especially in this day and age. And what I also would advise is yeah, follow the news closely. Because that also makes it more easier to contribute to the debate, to write articles in regards to the region, because it's in high that there's a lot of interest for the region at the moment. And at the same time, I think it's easy to already like kind of make your insight known, and to be able to contribute to different media outlets. And at the same time, yeah, try to visit as much as possible. I mean, that's now quite challenging at this point with the COVID-19 pandemic, and focus on the literature that is available um, already. And also, it's quite easy in this field to contact authors, and to enter like kind of the Gulf community. So also please feel free to consult with the different main academics that are working on the Gulf, because I think it's quite an easy area to get into in that regard. And most of the people who are working on the Gulf are quite accessible. So yeah, especially my advice would be yeah, follow everything closely, find out who the main academics are in regards to the Gulf region, who is writing the most the most insightful pieces in regards to the Gulf region. I mean, it has been a lot of developments, especially in the last year, in terms of like the academic research that has been um, uh, released, and I think that is a very positive contribution to the field. There are a lot of new perspectives that are being used to study the Gulf region. So I think especially an interdisciplinary approach, applying new perspective, is something that is now more and more encouraged within the field of Gulf studies. And I would definitely encourage also to look into the different fields out there, and how new theories from sociology, feminist studies, international relations could be applied to the Gulf region. And also, what I think is also important in regards to the region is to make more comparisons with other parts of the world. To also kind of avoid the Orientalist perspective, and to see like the commonalities and the differences that exist between Gulf countries and other parts of the world.
Yeah. In terms of, your personal experience with researching in the Gulf, have things, would you say that, you might not have had any adverse experience while being on field, on ground, but do you think things have become difficult?
Yeah, I might give quite a long answer now, but yeah, of course, like security has been an issue, especially also for the interviewees. I mean, their security has to be put up front. So I've been really careful in regards to anonymity with my PhD, and also ensure that I didn't have files that would reveal the identity of my interviewees. So I've been really careful with that during my fieldwork, both in Kuwait and Oman, also in terms of like yeah, storing data, uploading data using clouds. Um, I mean that's a very sensitive issue, and I also encourage everyone who's working on the Gulf to be very careful with that, and make sure that your data you acquire during your fieldwork is not easily accessible, and that you also protect the anonymity of your interviewers to any cost. And I think that that should also be central, because I mean, as an academic scholar from outside of the Gulf, you can always like leave the countries you're visiting, but for the people inside, it's they really can feel the repercussions of their contribution to your research. So their safety must be put first at all cost. Yeah, in regards to your question, I have been quite careful in regards to my communication when I was in Kuwait and Oman, but I still find it possible to speak to different people and also people who played quite prominent roles in demonstrations and protests in both countries. Um, but especially also in the last couple of years, I've become a bit more anxious about doing fieldwork in the Gulf region. Also, of course, what happened to Matthew Hedges, who's a very good friend of mine. And especially in certain countries, I would not encourage the same kind of research as I did in Kuwait and Oman. So, for example, in the UAE, I think it's really difficult to carry out interviews over there, especially what has happened with Matthew. And also because of the sensitivity, and in Saudi Arabia it would be the same. Also in Iran, it's very sensitive to do any research at all. And I mean, if it might also be a good question to ask if I would do the same research now in 2020, and I would say no. I think like it is what I've been researching is quite a sensitive topic. And especially what has been happening in terms of academic freedom in the last couple of years, I think it
So
is
which year? So the major part of your research took place in which year?
The major part of my research took
I
place
mean, the
in
fieldwork, sorry.
2016, 2017.
All right. So 3 years
Yeah.
on, if someone
Yeah.
asked you to do the same fieldwork, you would not be.
Yeah, no, I think it would be
Mm.
it would be too dangerous in terms of my own security, but especially also in terms of the security of my interviewees. So I think I would probably engage things in a different manner.
Wow. Thank you so much for that fascinating conversation, Dr. Hoetjes. It was great having you, and thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again.